Okay, hey, thanks guys for being here. I think for me, this is a really, really important topic to talk about. And a lot of people look at this and they think, isn't this what we already do? I mean, why do we need to have a class on this? Come on in. Yeah, should I just wait a little bit? Yeah, okay. Okay. Anyway, front row. Mike's going to sit up here in front row and critique me. I love it. But no, it is an important topic, and it's important because, well, first of all, we think about it and think, why is this something we need to be talking about in the church? Isn't this what we already do? And to understand that better, I'm just going to give you a whirlwind tour through history of the church over the last almost 100 years, so we can kind of set the stage for understanding why we need to talk about intergenerationality. Okay? So let's start with a word of prayer. Oh, Heavenly Father, I thank you for those who are here today, and I thank you for the conversations, for the thinking that we will do, and how we can raise up all generations in your church together to be the body of Christ, the kingdom of God in this world. And so, Lord, bless our conversations. Amen. Okay, so brief history of how the church became siloed in Western culture and the renewed focus on intergenerational Christian formation. Siloed. That's kind of a key word. So a whirlwind through, like I said, through history, the end of World War II, 1940s. What was happening during that time? There was an economic boom. Coming out of World War II, there was a lot of discretionary income that we had not had in the U.S., especially during the war years. And this is a really interesting fact. Did you know that the term teenager did not exist before the 1940s? It was coined in 1941, 42, right around there. So the whole idea of teenagers came at the same time that there was more discretionary income. And we'll talk about that in the next slide just a little bit more. There was also new technology. And I'm not talking about computers and that kind of technology. I'm talking about central air conditioning, or even air conditioning at all. I'm talking about television, of course, and clothes dryer. All of those things changed who we are in Western culture dramatically during this era. Because what happens if you don't have to go out in the backyard and hang your clothes on the clothesline to dry? You don't see the neighbors out in the backyards hanging their clothes on the clothesline, so you're not having conversations over the fence. You're not sitting on your porch in the cool of the evening and watching people walk by and meeting up with your neighbors. You're inside watching your TV with the air conditioner on, running your dryer. So it started breaking down community that was happening during that era. And then new mobility. Automobiles. We were able to do and go places that we hadn't done before, like private people owning their own automobiles. So my local church is down the block, and that's the church my family and I had always gone to with all of our neighbors that we talked to. We were hanging out clothes that we saw in the evening. We were sitting on our front porch. But now I have this option, and I have more discretionary time, and I have mobility. So I can go across town and go to the different church that offers something really a cool program for my teenagers. So all of this is happening at the same time, and it has a lot of impact on what the church looked like. So that the cultural influences of modernism, consumer Christianity, the rise of church as social service provider. But consumer Christianity, we had never thought about church being a consumer product that we could pick and choose. I could go across town, I can take my teens to that program, and all of a sudden the churches are competing for the attention of people. Also, what kind of social services does this church provide for me and for my family that'll make me want to go to that church? And we had this rise of people not looking at church as community. This is something that we are together, but instead looking at it as what's it going to give me? What's it going to do for me? Plus, well, okay, first of all, church growth strategists grew out of that era. We'd never thought about having a church growth strategist before, but now almost any church, if they want to grow, they will hire somebody to come in and tell them how they can do it better. Also, Jim Rayburn, during that era with Young Life, coined the phrases, to send to bore a kid with the gospel. Exactly grew out of these. It exactly grew out of those, that he was doing that. Parachurch youth ministries, youth organizations, the local churches felt they were competing with them for the hearts and minds and attention of the kids in their community. They were losing that. So all of this was happening right around the same era. And then on top of that, we had the rise of developmental theorists. Think Piaget, Kohlberg, Fowler, Erickson, all of those people who came in and said, this is how we develop as human beings, and we need to make sure that we have our churches kind of running along that same pattern. So we modeled a lot of what we were doing during that era after school. So if you go into an old church, have you ever gone into an old church where they have desks set up in the classrooms? Because we took that school model, we took those humanist developmental theorists, and we started modeling the church after that as a way of keeping people, but also educating them, because we thought this was the better way to educate them. And then an individualized and privatized faith grew out of this. So all of that was happening. And you could say a lot more about it, but anybody at this point want to say anything about it? Is that something you've thought about before? Yeah.
I'm just thinking of a story that one of the churches that I was associated with in the past, like we were going through some of their old files and documents, and there was like all these brochures from the 40s and 50s, and all these little kind of like campaign buttons, and it says, "I'm pro Sunday school."
Oh yeah.
There's like a conflict
Yes.
that was happening about.
Yes.
Like people were saying, we want to have Sunday school classes, and then there was a swath of people that were like against it. So it was like this.
Oh.
These materials that were like.
That's interesting. Yeah. Huh?
Might repeat part of that for the sound, the camera.
Oh, I'm sorry. So he was saying that there was a campaign, like little buttons they came across in storage that said, "I'm pro Sunday school," and the people who were pro sending their kids to be taught in a Sunday school as opposed to having them in worship and raising them in the home. Which brings up another good point, because Sunday school all of a sudden became about children and youth. And because all this convenience that we were looking for and the competition we were having for the hearts and minds of the consumer church, we started making it really easy. Only 1 hour on Sundays. You just have to give 1 hour on Sundays. Adults can go and worship, and kids can go to Sunday school. And they would happen at the same time, and that makes us so much more attractive than the church across the street, down the street, that you have to go for an hour of Sunday school and fellowship time and then have worship service. So that became much more the norm that we had never had before. I'm just going to touch on these two because I find these fascinating, so I'm just throwing these two slides in. But this is from a book by C. Ellis Nelson. I think it was the last book that he wrote before he died. It was in 2008, called Growing Up Christian: Congregational Strategy for Nurturing Disciples. And he gave this flow chart of the pattern of influence in culture that was happening during the 1800s to the early 1900s. The arrows with the solid lines mean that you have an influence on other parts of society. And so you notice that churches have a lot of power during that era. They have power over the government, over civil, and indirectly over civil life and laws and order. They have the power over the family, the Sunday school, public schools. And did you know that, I'm sure you knew this, that all of the Ivy League schools were started by Christians. So all of that was happening during that era. And then if you fast forward to mid-1900s to 2000s, it's even more so today than it was when he wrote this in 2008. But you've got media, government, workspace, then higher education. Those are influencing higher education. Church is way down here. Families over there. Look what's influencing the family. the public schools, the media, the higher education, the government, the workplace, civil life is influencing the family along with the church. And then you have, this is why people were probably wearing those buttons that say I'm pro Sunday school, because it was way down here all of a sudden. So all of that was taking place.
What are the dash lines? Are they just
Oh, that's an indirect, I'm sorry. That's indirect influence. But it's fascinating. If you guys want me to send you these two, I just think this is so fascinating to think about the patterns of influence. So all of this is happening in our culture. All of these influences that we talked about, plus this, and all of a sudden we're just tearing the family and the generations apart and separating them out. And I find this fascinatingly disturbing.
Was this when youth groups showed up as well?
Yes, well, youth groups, back in the 40s when I was back here, when I was talking about this, during the consumer, and even back before that in the teenagers, during that era is when youth, Young Life, Youth for Christ, all of those, and it was coming out of World War II, all of those parachurch organizations. And the church, instead of, usually sometimes appreciating them, they felt competitive. Because at the same time, the technology was causing them to lose, and the mobility to lose people. So it's just this perfect storm that was happening during that era.
And a lot of it felt so good.
It felt so good, yes.
That's my experience.
Yes.
Church was boring as a child until somebody invited me to their youth group.
Exactly. And so it makes it really hard to have any kind of negative things to say about youth group, children's ministry, all of these great clubs that were happening and everything. It makes it really hard to criticize them because we loved what they were doing, and they did make us feel good. We loved going to Young Life. This is, I love this little pattern. This is the church. This is what the church traditionally has looked like down through history. It's been all ages, everything in this nice circle of the community of the church. And then the 1940s, youth ministry came along, and it looked really attractive. And they were competing. The church was a lot of times competing, like I said, with the parachurch organizations. And then we decided we would add children's ministry. There had not really been a children's ministry. There had been Sunday school, but usually everyone was going to their classes at the same time with the adults and everyone. But now you have this children's ministry over here. Chap Clark and Mark DeVries and some others call this the Mickey Mouse. The 2 year. Actually, I'm going to go back here. That one was the one-eared Mickey Mouse, and then they added. We were finally completely a Mickey Mouse, and then after that, we started thinking, oh, this is going so well, and it's so much fun. Like Christy said, it's so much fun that we'll add men's ministry, we'll add women's ministry, and pretty soon we have singles ministry, family ministry, adult ministry, missions is in that mix, because if you are a big enough church, and we all strive for this, no matter what size church we go to, we strive for this being all of these things, like hiring a person over each one of those. I was on big church staff. I know exactly what it's like. You've got to hire a youth ministry. I even hear people here at our church say, we've got to hire a youth minister. We've got to have a youth program. If we just get big enough, we can hire a youth minister to do our youth kids. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, Mike. but it's just one more thing that separates the church apart. So, I think that we need to find this kind of balance between that. But if we're not aware of where we are to start with, that we've kind of disintegrated the church. This is what Mark DeVries calls an octopus without a brain. The church has been gutted, and now all these different programs are like individual little homogeneous unit churches out there. And missions, there's youth missions, there's children's mission, there's the adult missions. All of the missions are even broken up. You go on a mission trip. Mark DeVries said you show me a church that has a teen group going down to Mexico to build houses, and it's just teenagers, and I'm showing you a church that's missing a great opportunity to have all the ages together doing that. So it's like, yes, plan the youth ministry events, but make sure it's intergenerational when you do it. And that's hard. So children and youth who were segregated from the productive life of their parents and taught the beliefs, patterns, and practices of their parents' world in the abstract were less likely to take on those values and practice them for themselves. What does that mean? What does that mean when you read that?
Well, in the abstract, maybe there's something happening in the big church, but I don't really know what it is.
Okay.
For your youth.
Okay.
I'm not really experiencing it.
Or participating in it. Mary Frances?
So, like in the abstract, is it getting at like this is separate from praxis? Like the kid, you are giving, being given a lot of information, but not necessarily the formation that comes with this stuff being put into praxis or practice.
So they're learning about faith. They may even be going through catechism classes, but they're not really in worship, so they're practicing them. They're learning them separate from the body of believers. They're learning prayer separate from their parents. So they're learning in their Sunday school class, they pray for people, they do this, but it's not, they don't see their parents praying. And it makes it so much harder for us to try to do materials, and there's a plethora of materials out there for families to use in the home. I'm trying to do that too right now with our spiritual practices. We have these spiritual practices, but if the kids are not in the worship service to learn the practice of worship together as a family, it makes it really hard for them to understand what this means, and it makes it really hard for the parents to try to do this with their kids if they're not in a place where they're experiencing it with all generations. So just the knowledge that a kid gains from being in a church, they may not know what's happening in the sermon. They may not know a lot of the things that we're doing or why we're doing them, but they are looking around them. One of my favorite examples is going back to Mateo Bush. Remember Mateo? When he was about 5 years old, Christy sent me a video of him leading their family in Eucharist. They had pita bread and they had grape juice, and he knew all the words of institution. He had it down. He said it. No one taught him that. He just sat in worship every week, and he saw it happening, and he wanted his family to do it together. Yeah, you have a comment on that? Or you just...
Our kids did that too.
Oh, you did it too? Yeah, it's such a cool way, but it means that it's not in the abstract. You are embodied in that space, even if you don't understand.
It's similar to how kids learn a language. They're just thrown in.
Oh, yeah,
Into their
exactly.
Their family and with
Yeah,
their parents.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
rubs off. They're immersed.
Yeah, they're immersed in it.
If you're in a program all the time that's separate from the community where you'd be immersed in that full real life scenario.
Right.
Invitation into Christian adulthood. They're not seeing that modeled. It's kind of
Yeah, when they're not seeing it modeled, yeah.
and
So to be immersed, to see it modeled, to make it normal, to just observing and learning from observing. And like you said, like learning a language. I can try to learn Arabic a lot, listening to all the programs that are out there, but it wasn't until I went over to Sudan and spent 5 weeks there that I kind of learned to pick up on the language a little bit. And if I'd spent longer, I would have known it better. So this is from a study that Barbara Rogoff did actually was in the Sydney Diocese in Australia, but it's on a case study of sociocultural development theories for effective faith transmission in confessional Anglican churches. And this was done in 2023. And on the back of your handout sheets, I have all the quotes that I have here, so you can see a lot of them. It was really hard to narrow it down to those few because what's happening right now is so exciting. There's so much that's being written and studied about this topic at this point, and there's a reason for that. So moving us along, why intergenerational faith? I'll get back to that, the reason for that. But why intergenerational faith communities are good for faith and good for the church, and what does it look like? The term intergenerational differs from multi-generational. You can be a multi-generational community. You could have even been in a church in the 1930s and it was a multi-generational community. It's not necessarily an intergenerational. You might have multiple generations present in worship service. The generations may never interact with those from other generations. So to be intergenerational means that we are interacting. We're not just having people in the same space. You love this picture. Does that look familiar? I love Josiah reading the gospel. And Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who is such a great example of youth ministry, because that was his passion, was to do youth ministry in Germany after he became a Christian. And he said, for Jesus, the child is not merely a transitional stage on the way to adulthood. Something to be overcome. Quite the contrary, he or she is something utterly unique before which the adult should have the utmost respect. For indeed, God belongs to children, the good news belongs to children, and joy of the kingdom of heaven belongs to children. Doesn't that remind you of what we say of our blessing for our kids every Sunday? Look at the message that's being communicated there in that space. Todd's standing there, reading the scripture, the music team back there. All of these things just is such a rich picture for what we're talking about. He's not just present, he's participating in a meaningful, respected way.
And Todd's smiling.
And Todd's smiling, yes, I know. I love it, thank you, Todd. But intergenerational, multi-generational, so I'll repeat that, what I just said. Multi-generational, when generations are present in church or in worship at the same time. Intergenerational, changing ministry mindset from ministry to or for to ministry with. Scotty May, who is an emeritus at Wheaton College and the mother of Phil Vischer, if you're into Veggie Tales or whatever, but she wrote, did a plenary address at our Children's Spirituality Summit a couple of years ago, and then she wrote a chapter for the book that came out of that. And she talked about how the whole history of moving from ministry to, which is more the school model of getting the information in their heads, a lot of that came out of the developmental theorists, to our reaction to that when we thought kids were really bored with church or we were competing with the other church down the street. So we did ministry 4, which was entertainment-based, which is engaging, trying to take from the culture and do something for those kids that's really exciting, whether it's exciting stuff for high schoolers or kids or whatever. And then intergenerational, then with. Ministry with means that you're doing it to with and supporting each other. So Tim Bellhar's, this is, if you want to read a really good book on this, that's a really simple read, this just came out. Unfortunately, it's published in Australia because Australia is doing so much good work in intergenerational ministry right now, and there are a lot of stuff's coming out of there. But if you wanted to read a good book, you can get it on ebooks. And it's easy to read. It's something anybody in the church could just pick up and read. It's really easy. If you wanted to look at something a little more dense, but which is very comprehensive, I use the early edition of this as a textbook for the family ministry course I taught at Azusa Pacific University. But this is a much more thorough book. And then there's a lot of them in between that are coming out now that are just compilations from conferences. The cool thing about both these books is they have people from Australia, people from the UK, people from the United States, people from Canada writing chapters in them. So we're not just we're not on the cutting edge of this, folks. We are just catching up with a lot of things that are happening in the UK and in Australia. But Tim Belhars says, there may be a kid's spot, a moment in the service where the children are specifically addressed and their cognitive abilities catered for in the midst of the otherwise adult congregation. However, this is not reaching the mutuality and reciprocity envisioned in the definitional statement of intergenerational. So in other words, even though we do the blessing for the kids every Sunday, we can do more. You know, we are so far ahead of the curve in what we're doing here at Holy Trinity, and I love it, and I love that Todd champions this. But understanding what it means that we're not just multi-generational, which is a step ahead of a lot of churches. We want to become more intergenerational. Another great picture, this one with Declan this time, and his dad and Todd. How perfectly lovely is that picture? So this is the example, moving from ministry to or for to ministry with. Formational and generational engagement operating in both directions so that as children are being formed in the Christian faith, adults are also being formed and deepened in their own faith, which benefits their spiritual gifts for the sake of the maturity of the whole church. And it's in keeping with who we are in C4SO, Church for the Sake of Others. Is that just a perfect statement? I love that statement. I may have written it. I don't remember where I got it from. But it reminds me, this is what we are. And it's for both sides. It's like when you were talking, is Michelle, right? Is Michelle? Melissa. Melissa. When Melissa was talking about learning that language, when we are learning somebody's language, it makes them more aware of their language, and we both grow better in our knowledge together. So, anything at this point you want to say before I jump into this next part? Should we keep going? Okay, sociocultural learning theories. Homogeneous unit principle, or HUP for short. A missiological concept proposing, and this is on your sheet, I think it's on the back of your sheet, proposing that churches grow faster by focusing on a demographically similar group, a homogeneous unit, because people find it easier to become Christians when they can cross fewer cultural, ethnic, and class barriers. This was popularized back in the 1950s by Donald McGavran. It says late 20th century. I looked it up. I think it was like 60s or 70s maybe. The principles suggest that sharing a common language, history, or class creates a sense of comfort and belonging that facilitates spiritual growth. This was a theory that was very popular mid-20th century. So when all this breaking down of communities and everything that was happening, a lot of it felt like it was a really good thing to do because we look at this. So teenagers, the idea was that teenagers would develop faith best when they're with other teenagers, or that children would develop faith best when they were with other children, or that people of particular ethnicity will understand and be able to worship together better if they're only with people from their ethnicity. So obviously this is debunked. But it's interesting to think of the influence that this has had over the decades. This whole idea of homogeneous unit principle. Barbara Rogoff, again, who did that case study of sociocultural theories in 2023, said, by separating by age, we've lost the ability to have spiritually formative relationships, and we have lost the ability to learn to be blessed by our children. We've lost the ability to learn and be blessed by our children.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
That principle, you said it's a missiological concept.
Yeah, I know.
Did it come out of a church?
It did. It did. And I need to study this a little bit more. I got this quote out of a different book, and I looked him up online, but I should have taken better notes on it because, as I was saying, I think it was 50s, but maybe it was 70s. I don't know. But he was in league with the church. It was the church growth movement. Yes. Yeah. Which is really interesting because that gives us a reason, an excuse, and a motivation to separate generations out and ethnicities out. And all of this, I mean, it's just like this. And now we are so separate in so many ways. I mean, it's just all exacerbated by this whole concept of this. So I find it fascinating. Then there is ZBD, Lev Vygotsky, he's Russian, Zone of Proximal Development, which is actually the theory that is behind a lot of the books and articles and things that we're reading now on intergenerationality. And unfortunately, he died in his late 30s, so he wasn't around very long, but he had a lot of influence during that time. But he looked at that zone of proximal development as a phase of development in which a person has only partially mastered a task but can participate in its execution with assistance and supervision, learning through participation with more experienced members of the culture. And I highlighted this in yellow. Identity and belonging occur through peripheral participation. And this is going to come into play next week when we talk about the characteristics of Gen Alpha. That is kids born between 2010 and 2025. In other words, all the ones sitting on the couch right over there, except for the parents, all you guys. Gen Alpha, and I've been doing a lot of, I just did an article, or wrote a chapter for a book on Generation Alpha, and I'm just fascinated by this. All of my grandchildren fall into that category, and I love seeing what they are starting to find as the characteristics that are emerging from this generation, this newest generation, in comparison to Gen Z and the millennials and Gen X. You know, it's really pretty fascinating. And identity and belonging is one of the key things that this generation is seeking after in unique ways. I mean, we all are seeking after this, but it's really manifesting itself with Gen Alpha today, those kids born between 2010 and 2025. So I love looking at what Vygotsky did with his zone of proximal development and what that means for meeting this need and what it means for the church. There's a lot of levels there. We'll talk more about that next week. But Tim Bellharz again, his book says, as children learn songs, liturgies, prayers, and ways of serving alongside those who are older, as they pray with and for those who are older, as they participate on the periphery of the church community, they are engaged and learning from the practices of their faith community. Any thoughts or comments on that? What does that mean for us in this community of faith? It doesn't happen on accident. It has to be intentional. And that's the heart of what I'm doing in this class. It's not just to teach you a lot of theories, but it's to say we are on the right path, but how do we do this intentionally? It could just happen, especially if we lived all in the same neighborhood and we were coming to this church and we saw each other hanging out our clothes like we talked about earlier and everything all the time. But we have to be intentional about what that looks like and how we do it. Oh, we got pictures again. I love it. Todd washing the children's feet on Monday, Thursday. And I love this Eli and Shep over here waiting for their feet to be washed. That was a beautiful evening together. And it was kind of serendipitous because we really didn't intend that. But there was a lot of grace abounding there, right?
Yeah, what happened was, of course, the previous year we had not we had invited, everyone to come forward, and just a few people came forward, and some people brought their kids. That was great. This year we thought, well, maybe we'll just symbolically choose some adults to come forward and wash their feet during the service, and that'll be visually teach the servanthood of Jesus Christ. And then, but at some point someone came up to me and said, hey, all the kids want to get their feet washed. And so I said, okay, my mistake. Let's just, let's do it. And so that's what happened.
Good for you for going with it.
Yeah, he did. You did. It was really, really great. And I think, again, they didn't understand the depth of what they were doing, but they knew that they felt comfortable enough in this community that they could participate in that.
So cool.
And they're learning. And I love that. And I love this quote from Michael George, I think it's George, in Growing Together, the book Growing Together. Intergenerational congregations are those who consider each group cohort as vital to the life, growth, and worship of the congregation as a whole, and intentionally seek out ways to integrate every age into congregational life. And sometimes it happens by grace and serendipitous, whatever, and sometimes it's planned. More often, if you have people in that zone of proximal development, you have them all there together, it may not be as planned. It may happen because the Holy Spirit is actually showing up. Added value of intergenerational church community is strengthening faith at home. And I alluded to this back at the beginning. But when children are in the worship community, then when they want to pray with their kids at home, they want to read the scripture with their kids at home, they want to light a Christ candle and whatever they are doing there, talk about faith, missional work, whatever, it is so much easier if they have already seen it done in the community. It's so much easier. So we keep trying to guilt parents into doing this at home, but we're not giving them any kind of support in the community. We are. Holy Trinity is doing really pretty good at that. But there's a lot of churches where that's not happening. And you go to another church and you say, take this home and do it with your kids, and it's foreign. It's like a foreign language to them. So I love that we can do that. I just wish we had more of the young parents in here today. So, yeah, you guys. But
Would you say then that we have kind of three things we're all blending together? Like there is strength in everybody being together in church, but that there is something valuable about being with your own age group and
Yes. Yes.
learning those things, but then to blend them all with the intergenerational thing where we're offering opportunities.
yes, that's a great way of saying it. Thank you. Did y'all hear that?
And I'm
Yeah.
thinking especially of, I don't know, children or teens whose parents don't go to church,
Mm-hmm.
So you have something there for them as
Yes,
well.
yes.
And
And that's an interesting thing about Holy Trinity. We don't have that issue ever that we did at St. Andrews. And that was always the argument that everyone brought up. Well, what about the kids who just get dropped off at church and they're for Sunday school or vacation Bible school and then leave, never see the inside of the sanctuary unless they're performing, and their parents don't come. And that's a hard problem, but I think that what we have done in our concern over those kids is shortchange the kids who are here. And if those kids could feel comfortable enough, even with their friends who they came with, to go into the worship service with the kid's family or whatever, or be included in those ways, I think that it would actually accomplish more of what we want in making them feel part of the community than just having them in a comfortable group just with their own age, especially if it's ministry 4 where they're entertaining them a lot. It can happen, and it does happen. But you're right, Christy, in saying, and I think that if you didn't all hear her, that it's a combination. It's not just one thing, it's a combination. It's a combination, but worshiping together is probably the key component of that. But also have youth ministry doing things if we have that together. But it doesn't mean the kids are excluded from. Or children's ministry. I think we have the best of all worlds when the kids leave during the sermon and come back in. You know, it really is meeting multiple needs. And also, it doesn't replace them being at home and doing family worship and family prayer and family, the experience of living as a faithful family together. But all of those are complemented when we have it happening in one place, in all three places. You know, if it's happening in the church and then it happens at home, that child is learning so much more. If it happens in church and at home and they learn it in the atrium or in a youth program or whatever, it's all of those things just build on each other.
Yeah, it does
It's
strike
called
me
synergy.
that parachurch organizations, when it comes to youth, have made an incredible impact on many people's lives who are now in their 40s, 50s, 60s. But it strikes me a lot of the value is evangelistic.
Yes.
So they're attracting youth evangelistically, and that's fantastic. People whose parents don't go to church, or the kids have rejected church. And the question is, where do these kids go from there? Where do they go from
Yes.
one life? Where do they go? Or
Yes.
do they top out and are left kind of in a free fall? Or if something happens in a young life group, and it may be no fault of the staff, it's just that, alliances are formed and demolished in all teenage relationships, on a weekly basis, and they leave the group, there's no net any longer for that. So can those groups function evangelistically, that is to say, to attract, and can they have a relationship with the church such that over time that group decreases and the church increases in its
Yes.
child's life? And so
Yes.
I don't know, and maybe, I'm sure all those groups have thought through that. I haven't
Well,
done
Smith,
research.
Christian Smith and Melinda Denton, they did a study in the late 90s called Soul Searching.
Okay.
Is anybody familiar with that?
Yeah, we actually have that book somewhere.
Yeah.
Many copies of it, actually.
Yeah, and I think it'd be great for them to do another study now. I know that they've done some other things. Is anybody familiar with what Christian Smith has done recently? I think he just came out with a new book. But this was a very comprehensive study that they did with kids from all sorts of, anywhere from Baptist to Mormon to Jewish to Presbyterian to Anglican and Catholic. They had kids from all of these things. And what they were tracking was these kids who had been in youth groups and been very active in youth groups, but had walked away from their faith when they went to college. And those are the ones after high school, they were not part of the church anymore.
They didn't have any experience.
They had no experience with the church. And then they would come back to the church when they had little kids, but they wanted their kids to have the same experience they had, so they want them to be in with the children's ministry and the youth group ministry because they want to replicate that a second time, or the parachurch ministries. They still haven't made the connection with the church. And that is such an interesting, do you want to say something?
Well, to Todd's point, that's why when Billy Graham was alive, the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association began to, at the events, plug people into churches when they came up with a counselor,
And not just-
because they knew that they couldn't just, let them.
But a lot of people did come up and then walk away and think,
Well, yeah, but I mean, they became aware of the fact later that they had to plug people into churches as follow-up,
yeah.
and not just kind of give them a book and say, here.
What Smith and Denton discovered, and they coined the phrase moralistic therapeutic deism, MTDs, and that they had this moralistic view of God, teaching me right from wrong. Therapeutic, God's there to be my best friend, which we sold a lot. I remember standing up in vacation Bible school, raise your hand if you want to receive Jesus as your best friend. I mean, those words came out of my mouth. It's just like, oh my gosh, what were we doing? But you're teaching that therapeutic, God's there to help you, to be your best friend. That doesn't mean that God's not there to help you and be your best friend. It's just that's not all God is there for. So there was the moralistic, the therapeutic, and then the deistic, the God off, kind of somewhere. I don't know if you can explain that better than I just did, but I find that that was their finding, and they said they didn't see any reason to be in church. How many times have you heard somebody say, especially back in the late 20th century, I don't need to go to church to worship God? So you're just being separated more and more, not part of a community. All of these things are just, separating. Go ahead.
I was going to say, if church is something I consume, I'm not saying it is, but if that's your worldview,
Right.
then there's no community aspect to it.
There is no community
I
aspect.
can consume something like that in a variety of settings, and I can stay in my bubble.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've had discussions with my daughter about teaching over Zoom, and the same thing applies.
You're not in community. Yeah.
She's not with that person speaking
Right.
to them. She's speaking to a screen,
Yeah.
and they're receiving it from a screen.
Yeah. Yeah. Steve?
I had a question back to the Christian Smith book. Was that the one that studied the Jewish Catholic?
Yeah, that was soul searching.
Curious, did they find any differentiation between all those different faith traditions, or was it just like they all
Yeah.
had that issue? Is that
Well, it was happening in a lot of them. I think that they found that the Catholics and the Mormons were much better at staying in community than the evangelicals were. So there was a lot. They have a lot of statistics on that. They also did a video. I remember playing it. We had it at APU, and they showed it. They did a video of interviews that came out of there. You can probably still find it on YouTube. That interviews with a lot of the students they worked with. But
Anecdotally, my daughter, when she was younger, some of her classmates were Jewish, and they were going through bar mitzvah and bar mitzvah. What's the theme? Bar mitzvah.
bat mitzvah, yeah.
And she kind of came over and said, "Dad, I wish we had a tradition like that in Christianity."
Ah.
And we were doing confirmations Holy Spirit at the time. She was actually going to St. Andrews anyway. We were already split up. And yeah, so there is that. She sensed the community aspect in the Jewish world.
Oh, is it? Thank you. Okay.
She's a rabbi. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, I think one reason that so many younger people are attracted to the Anglican Church, and the reason it works really well intergenerationally with the kids and adults and everything, is because we do spiritual aerobics every week. We have these traditions and these rituals, which we will talk about next week. So I was just informed. I thought, wow, I'm doing really well. It's actually 5 after. So, okay. I'm just going to throw 2 more things at you really fast. I would have moved along faster, but cultural shifts as opportunities for faith formation. I'm just going to mention this because I think it's also fascinating. Moving from modernity, the Age of Enlightenment, to the early 20th century modernity, to postmodernism or postmodernity in the mid to late 20th century, to what we are now in, which is a postmodernity era, and the early 21st century. And I love this quote by Phyllis Tickle, her book, The Great Emergence. And she said, about every 500 years, the church feels compelled to hold a giant rummage sale, and we are living through one of those 500-year sales right now. And I think that we are, and I think that this is where we are making a course correction in the churches. And a lot of that, it's kind of the reformation of intergenerational ministry. So I love that whole idea. And I also love, if you're a fan of Charles Taylor, and the immanent frame, and then the opening up the box and letting the transcendence come in, and Jamie Smith talks about this. I think that all of that ties in with what we're saying as far as our rituals and our traditions and our connecting on deeper levels, our identity and our belonging. All of those things are wrapped up in this time that we're going through, and I just love to embrace it. And when I look at these kids who are coming up in Gen Alpha, and I see how much of this is kind of playing out. So we'll talk about that next week. So next week we'll talk about characteristics and needs of Generation Alpha, the gifts of narrative in faith formation, becoming part of a story, which is another thing that I'm so excited about. How do we become part of a story in forming identity and belonging? How do we help youth and children to become part of that story? Not just to receive some moral teachings, not just youth group, but it's that how do you become part of a bigger story? The role of Christian practices in faith formation and practical steps for faith communities, specifically for HTC. So next week we're going to be doing all of that. On the third week, Todd has pulled together, or is pulling together, a group of different generations, and we're going to have a panel discussion. And Todd wrote some amazing questions that he's going to be throwing out to them. But we'll just have a chance to dialogue about this a little deeper. So we're going just a little deeper each week, but I wanted to set the stage of this. So I hope that you found it helpful. Like I said, the quotes are on the back. Keep talking about it. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you so much for that.
Sure, sure.